Interesting hi-hats can really make a big difference to your tracks. So today I'm going to show you 7 ways to get a bit more creative with your hi-hats. But before I do, if you're looking for any free music production resources, go check out that free downloads link in the description. Alright, so this is the track that we're going to be making some hi-hats for. Just a groovy little number with some chords and a bass line, pretty simple stuff. And I guess the premise of this whole video comes from the fact that plugging in hi-hats and just drawing them in can be quite a utilitarian task. Sometimes it's a little bit uninspiring or even boring, and especially as a learning producer, if you can make your production process as intuitive and fun as you can, that's a huge benefit because it'll make you want to produce more and therefore make you improve quicker. So these are all techniques that are just going to make the process of something like making hi-hats a little bit more fun. And the first one is Decay Automation. So I've just got this little closed hi-hat loop here. Right, I'm just going to solo the drums. And this one is something that I do super common because it's so easy to do. So if I pull this sustain down on this simpler, now the decay controls the length of the hi-hat. So let's have a listen as I move it around. And this is just something that is really, really easy to do and has the potential to create a lot of groove in your tracks as well. So I'm just going to simply hit record and play around with this decay knob. And then afterwards you can sort of go into the automation if you want and be a bit more technical and sort of look at what you've done and maybe fix up some spots if you like, or you can just choose sections of it that you like. Another option that you have is you can actually duplicate the track like this. Maybe on this one you could transpose it down and do a different automation so they have slightly different feels, but there's lots of options that you can do here. It's just a really quick and easy thing to grab and automate right away. So next technique, I'm just going to trigger these live by hand using my keyboard. So this is also a really fun way of doing things, and you can't really go wrong because we've got the quantization feature in Ableton. So I can just literally hit anything and then just quantize it onto the grid where a hat would potentially be, and you can make some interesting rhythms, and it's a little bit more fun as well. So let's have a go and just sort of trigger this hat somewhat randomly. This works really well with sort of those syncopated hats. And I'm just going to go in here and hit Shift Command U, and that's going to bring up our quantization settings. Just make sure you're hitting on 16th notes and you're adjusting the start. And then I'm also going to engage the groove over here. So I've got a groove set up for this track. And then we can sort of just adjust, have a listen and adjust the notes accordingly. So it's really easy to do this. Maybe something like bring these over a bit, something like this. Oh yeah, I like that. So I'm just going to duplicate this over a bit. So we have this just sort of playing at the end of each bar. And maybe I've got this open hat here now. And let's have a go with this one as well. There we go. And sort of just, again, Command U to quantize those. You could maybe, ooh, that one's sort of hitting on that last one, but maybe I could just make it shorter. And maybe move this one back one. I think that's kind of a cool vibe. It's sort of changing each time, but I wouldn't necessarily have thought to do that if I wasn't playing it and accidentally doing it with my keyboard. So let's maybe just duplicate these over and then duplicate this one as well. And then maybe with this one, I can fill some gaps in here as well. I kind of like this note, which kind of happens just a bit before these ones. And let's have another listen, maybe. It's kind of getting a nice groove in here as well. So really easy and fun and very hands-on as well. So this next one, I'm going to be using a loop. Sounds a little bit like that. And I'm just going to put it onto the slice mode and zoom in a little bit. Oops, and zoom in over here. And so with the slice mode, how it works is if I make a MIDI clip, if I go down to C1, that's the first slice, and they go up chromatically. So what I'm just going to do is make some 4 notes just chromatically, and these are just going to be triggering the first 4 slices. So if we look down here, right? And then now that this is set up, what we can actually do is play around with these slice boundaries. So if I drag this over to the right, you can hear that this second one becomes a little bit quieter. Let me just turn that up for you. And if I drag it over to the left, it sort of starts to swing them as well. Yeah, this can make some really interesting results. It's worth playing around with. So you'll notice that as I move this one to the left, then this is kind of like the end point for this one and the start point for this next cell. So you have quite limited control here, because if I move this back, then you'll start to trigger the start of this one. So if you wanted a little bit more control, what you can do is actually just separate them out into different every second note like this. So now you'll see that each cell will have like its own start and end point. So there's a lot of experimentation to be done with this technique, but it's a lot of fun, so you should definitely try it out. So this next one is using hi-hat loops to create sort of little ghost note textures. And I have this loop loaded into this sampler here. And what I'm going to do in this case is actually just grab the MIDI from this track here and just drag it on. And this is just that classic house hi-hat MIDI, you know, sort of between each kick drum. And then using our loop here, what we can actually do is go in here and find a spot that we like and use another hat that is in this loop to create like a kind of like a ghost note in there. This is a really fun technique, and it sort of adds a little bit of texture to your hi-hat. So have a listen to what I mean so far. So you can see that this is actually playing 2 notes right now, right? And if I turn the sustain down and play with the decay, I can get just a little bit of this one, but mostly this one. Let's just turn the volume up for you. And that will just add a little bit of texture. These sort of subtleties in our drums make a really big difference, adds a lot of groove and texture, I think. What you can actually do as well is in simpler, because we've got this warp mode, you can sort of just play around with the different warp functions. So maybe I want to bring this over here. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do there, but using these hi-hat loops and the ADSR envelope in there to create these sort of ghost texture notes is a really, really interesting technique. So we've got another similar hi-hat loop here. And you can actually get some really, really interesting effects when you warp hi-hat loops. So I'm just going to warp this out. I'm just holding shift and dragging the edge. Make sure it's in warp mode. So it's in beats mode at the moment, and it's on this forwards and reverse arrow, and you get some really weird and cool artifacts when you do this. So have a listen. If I warp it out even further, you get some really interesting kind of glitchy results. I really like that one. So maybe I could grab this one and sort of just place it in here. So I really like this beats warping algorithm with the forwards and backwards arrow. You can get some really interesting artifacts that are actually very, very usable. To take this even further, what you can do is actually just resample all of the drums and percussion in your track. I've just done that here. And a really fun thing to do is actually warp it the exact same way. So I'm just going to put it into beats mode, and then warp this out and try and listen for some interesting artifacts. So that's really cool. I think it almost sounds like a hip hop beat. So you could even drag the tempo down and sort of sync this up with the grid. So now 80 BPM, this is kind of feeling like a hip hop beat now, right? So I've warped this loop with this beats mode and I'm now in 85 BPM. So this is much slower than we were before. And I've just put a kick and a clap to this. And this has a pretty nice potential for a hip hop loop. So have a listen to this. So there's some really cool artifacts in this loop with it warped, and it creates these really cool textures. So it's definitely a lot of fun to experiment with resampling your project and your hi-hats and then warping them that way. All right, so a similar hi-hat loop again, and this time we're going to be using beat repeat to make some interesting textures. So I'm just going to grab one. And it's a lot of fun to experiment around with this thing. If you don't really know what it does, then the best way to learn it, as it is a very experimental device, is sort of just play around with its functions and see how it goes. You can even go in here and play with some of these presets as well. This vocal fun one is a nice one that I like. And it's really as simple as that. Experimenting around with beats repeats really just sort of creates the rhythm for you. So another really simple and easy one to give you a bit of inspiration. And the last technique today is using selector kits. So this is something you can use on hi-hats, but you can also do it on any sort of percussion instrument or effects. There's a whole bunch of selector kits in Ableton, and when you click on the cell, there's this little macro here, and that sort of changes which hi-hat you select. So it's really fun to just hit record and mess around with this knob, and it changes the hi-hats around and makes it sort of interesting and a little bit dynamic as well. I've just sort of more or less drawn these notes at random, and then I'm just going to hit record and play around with this a bit. And then I'm just going to do the same with the second hi-hat as well. So this is a cool one, again, a little bit more experimental and kind of yields some interesting randomized results that you could record into another track or just go through and find the bits that you like and sort of duplicate them over as well. This one was really to show you that the music creation process shouldn't be boring, and you should try to make this process as fun and as intuitive as you can. Any of these processes that you do that are a little bit tedious, you can often replace with another way of working that's a little bit more fun. So I hope these techniques have helped you find some inspiration. If you've enjoyed the video today, remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, thanks for hanging out, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.